Good day and welcome to the Strong Ambition Podcast. I'm your host, Rylan Qualley. I'm here to dive into what makes people ambitious. What do they do in their life that makes them different? And what kind of knowledge can they share with us to help us live a better life and help us go after what we want, especially in the realms of training, nutrition, and mindset? So this next guest is great because I've always seen her as an incredibly ambitious person and just so well disciplined, such a strong mindset, and especially around food. Kristen Mitteness is a chiropractor, and she is also a CrossFit coach and also practices as a naturopath and helps people heal through food, which is such an interesting realm that, so many clinicians are now seeing this root cause problem with autoimmune issues and how someone could have some sort of a reaction, maybe an infertility. And if you clean the food up, it can actually help heal your body. And this is some of the things that we dive into in this conversation. So I really love this. There's a lot of information when it comes to food, a lot of kind of myths, and we even have some differencing of opinions when it comes to how to help people with their food. So there's a lot that you can get from this because a couple of different perspectives, but we also have a lot of the same stuff when it comes around whole food eating. So dive into this one. Without further ado, here is Kristen Mitteness. And welcome, Kristin. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
I'm quite well. So, before I always give a little rough introduction from what I know about you, but I always love it if the individual can give their own formal introduction. Tell us about yourself and kind of what, kind of even brought you into the whole fitness, nutrition, and even to the business you're currently doing today.
Sure. So I'm originally from the U.S., from West Central Minnesota. My father's a chiropractor. My mom runs his business. When I eventually went into chiropractic school, and when I finished with that, I had the opportunity to move to Winnipeg. And here I am. My background is track and field. I ran in college and have competed in CrossFit and raced duathlons, the whole gamut of things. And right now, my general focus is chiropractic, nutrition, exercise. I do still coach CrossFit with a big focus on prenatal and postnatal recovery.
That's a good summary. That's quite a resume. I actually find, that history of track is pretty unique because I rarely run into a track athlete that isn't athletic. So that was probably a great fundamental base for you. How old were you started and did you get quite competitive?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined track when I was 9 and I started competing when I was 9. And it was, track and field is like the ultimate athletics, right? It's just all the different things that come out of, or any sport is made around. So I competed from when I was 9 through college, and then even competed a little bit after college, just with longer form races. So I was one of the lucky ones who was naturally talented. So it kind of pushed me into it, and I enjoyed it. So it worked out well.
Yeah, that and like you say, it's all the athletics that go into it, and it's when you take a track athlete, you put them into something, they're not going to have as hard of a time in almost anything. There are certain movements. Don't get me wrong, skating in hockey is just a different plane that humans aren't used to. But I'm willing to bet you take that guy or girl and you put them on ice, and once they know, they're going to be powerful, right? Like there's just
absolutely
that root athleticism that you get from it. So did you find like other things that you were doing later on you were just that much more natural at?
Yeah, you create a base of endurance that you just don't have otherwise. And when you develop that at such a young age, and I was also at the time a gymnast, so it gave me both power and endurance, which kind of like they both helped each other a lot. So between like understanding body awareness, and yeah, just that baseline of athletics was super helpful. And I never would have considered myself an athlete because I never played team sports, which I think a lot of people, when they think of sports, they think of team sports. And I wasn't confident in team sports, so I didn't consider myself an athlete, but I definitely am generally athletic. Thankfully, it helps in a lot of things.
Yeah, I think like team sports is where a lot of people think, but I mean, you can actually stretch it a fair bit. Like, some people might not agree, but like golf, like I mean, I see people like dart has its own form of athleticism. They're not like the bowling. I mean, I'm not going to say that these are the prime as athletes, but it's an athletic event. People look at bodybuilding as an athletic event. There's training, there's nutrition, like you can stretch that a little bit, but I love your scope of experience. So, with all this different training, all these different disciplines, what were like, you had to be competitive, like this had to kind of alter the kind of mindset you had. What were some big moments for you kind of growing up that kind of fostered that?
Oh, what a good question. When I guess the background in gymnastics helped develop a lot of my just trust in my abilities. I wasn't actually very good at gymnastics, but it gave me a lot of the skill that transferred into track and field and just general athletic events and body awareness. So being confident in other things that I was doing. And even I actually, as a female, we have a tendency of peaking really early. So I was a state competitor by 9th grade. Like I was one of the best athletes. And then in college, we ended up, I didn't develop a ton past college or into college, but I kept enough endurance that like my relay team still holds the record for Bemidji State. And we were actually conference record holders that year also, but we got second place. So both of us broke the conference record the same year and we still lost, which seems crazy, but I actually just looked that up the other day and yeah, my name's still there. So it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. And that is really interesting. I remember reading about this, that it becomes way harder for junior champions to excel as senior champions, because if you specialize so much so early, you end up kind of wearing it out in some way, or you're almost better off specializing in something and transferring it over. It's all in theory, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you have professionals that have just been good their whole life, but did you find that just by chance that you were kind of overwhelmed with being so specialized so young, and then that development became harder as you got older?
Yep, for sure. And I even saw that around me, like a lot of I saw it more in female athletics, and I don't know all the reasons for it, but a lot of us, when we were in 9th, 10th, 11th grade, we would end up winning and like different events. And then a lot of the senior athletes ended up not. And then the ones who were like not quite as good later on or started later, they would have more success into college. Yeah, super interesting. And then that's just anecdotally, that's just what I saw. I have no research to back that up, but that's just what I saw from my background.
Well, that's what I remember seeing a research paper talk about. So it's relatively supported, I think, by the one that I remember seeing back in school. But yeah, so like, I mean, let's fast forward a little bit, because I know I wanted to get you on here talking about food. So what kind of evolved this scope, and you go into chiropractic, and what puts you, first talk about that, and then tell me how you went down the path of, a naturopath and food.
Right. So when I was growing up, my mom, after she had my youngest sister, they did a C-section. They found a grapefruit-sized tumor on her ovary, just by happenstance, did a full hysterectomy to pull everything out. And so now she's 30 years old, no ovaries, no uterus, full menopause. And her background, so her dad is a medical doctor. She's done the medical route for everything. So right after that, they put you on artificial hormones, whatever. She felt not great. But now that she'd been with my dad at that point for about almost 10 years and had seen the chiropractic side of things, and it had opened her eyes to alternative medicine sources. And so she kind of went down the rabbit hole with her naturopath and acupuncture, and just wanted to feel better, and inherently knew the medical route was not necessarily the right way to go at that moment. So she tried a bunch of things and was introduced to the blood type diet, which, say what you want about the blood type diet, I don't agree with it wholeheartedly, but I think it does a great job of getting all the junk out of your diet and making sure we're eating good whole foods. So my family is all type O's and type A's. So that meant we were eating gluten-free, dairy-free, lots of meat, lots of veg, like very paleo-esque. And from that alone, she improved her health so much. And the interesting thing in hindsight is, even though we were eating like that, and that's the late 90s, so there's no gluten-free aisle, there's no gluten-free bread, you're just literally making stuff up as you go, coming up with your own recipes. The upside was my dad is a pretty avid hunter, so we always had wild game. And we were raised to diet. What we ate was to support our health, especially with my mom's health issues. It was never, we didn't eat for calories. We didn't eat to look a certain way. We ate what was best for us from a health standpoint. And my parents, intentionally or not, did a really good job of making what we were doing very normal. I didn't realize how weird we were at the time. So I ended up dealing with some similar health issues. I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome in 2007, and working with a naturopath and modifying my diet. And remember, at that point, I knew we should probably not be eating gluten. We should probably not be eating dairy, but I was still a college student and was still eating plenty of junk food and drinking too much and all that good stuff, that my health was definitely affected. And once I finally worked with the naturopath and modified my diet just a little bit, went on appropriate supplements, I ended up having I had symptoms for 2 years of, my main symptom was amenorrhea. So I didn't have a period for 2 years. That once I cleaned everything up, I had my first period in 3 weeks. So once you find the right stuff, it works fast. So it just solidified how important nutrition was for me. And so it's since then, it's been a big focus of my practice and my learnings and my research, and something I do a lot in addition to chiropractic, because it is so important, and it is something we do multiple times a day, every day for the rest of our lives. So it's been quite the journey.
That is quite the journey. And I mean, I a few really big things there. I love how you said that your family was able to make it normal, because your norm is actually so important. And, that's something I always kind of admired about you, is that it wasn't crazy for you to know how to eat healthy. And it's just because it was the way you ate. And now I've evolved my way that way. And it's really, it's interesting how characters need to change. It's such a challenging thing. You had this life altering thing that was like, hey, if you don't change this is threatening you. Sometimes that's what people need, And so I'm just really curious, from your view, do you see that's what are some of the major motivations you try to utilize, I think, rather, because that was a motivation for you, but when you deal with clients and stuff like that, how do you get them to clean up that food?
Well, you can't make someone's purpose for them. You can see what they should do, but until they have a purpose or a reason to change, no one's going to make any changes whatsoever. So you have to find out what's important to you and why is it important. Because that's really if we're going to make any change in our life, we have to have a reason for it. And that's why these big catastrophic health conditions are typically like a kick in the butt. Oh, shoot, what I'm doing does make a difference. And I think as a society, we underutilize the importance of diet also. So bringing that to light for people, how, and like I said, like you're going to eat unless you're fasting, which most of us don't do, you're going to eat every day for the rest of your life. So to not think what you put in your body is a huge piece of the puzzle. It's so and that's more enlightening for people than we often realize. Someone like you and me who do know the importance of food. But the other thing we have to do for our clients is make it work for them and make them realize that some of these changes are just temporary, just to see what kind of results we get. And the rules can change and will change a lot as we go. I think a lot of us try to pigeonhole ourselves into this worked for this person, so this has to work the exact same for me, and it has to be perfect. Where we're very adaptable creatures. Like you can make lots of different things work, and what works for you right now might not work for you in a year from now. It might not be what you need depending on what's going on in your life, when stress changes, when workouts change. But that's hard for people to understand and to take ownership of. Some people don't even want to know that something that they're doing every day is negatively affecting their life. So once we can hit a fine line between empowering people to have the options and then determine what's going on, because no one wants to feel guilty for doing stuff either. And food is so easily makes people feel so guilty, and sometimes they'll take that shame out on you as the person who's coaching them, or themselves, and either of those can be a slippery slope. So yeah, food's such an interesting thing, and it's so culturally based too. Like there's some people who, when I talk about the importance of meat as a protein, who are just like so offended that I would even suggest such a thing. It's just wild. But
well, you touched on something so powerful there, and the word culture. It's like the fact that food is personal is why like people say food's so hard. It's all in the kitchen, and I heard a guy say it very well. It's like it's not all in the kitchen. It's one part exercise, one part diet, and one part recovery. But what makes that the major thing there with nutrition is it's social, it's emotional, it's physical, it's daily, it's cultural, it's at work, it's at home. It's, you can have it in so many different ways. But someone writes you a workout for 45 minutes, a half hour of your day, or an hour, like that's not going to affect you emotionally as much. It's going to affect you physically, like because there's such an overlap with how we treat food psychologically. It's such a powerful thing. But, and it's also really cool when you can overcome this obstacle, when you can overcome this emotional identity by food. And, I even had a client once who said, I don't want to lose food as my friend. And it's just like, you just made that, and I know that relationship. I've had that relationship with food. And like I used to say, it was dating food, because if you're single, you're not going out on the weekend, right? And it's like, well, I haven't had a good cheat meal in a while. I'm gonna order skip the dishes. All right, let's have a date. And that's kind of how it goes, because you get so much from it, right? It's so intense, and so let's dive into some of the food fallacies here. So
oh, sure.
Yeah, I'd love to dive into that, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. So what do you see as the top 3 to 5 mistakes commonly being made by people when it comes to food?
I think we want to make food either good or bad. We want to categorize it. This is a good food. This is a bad food. Food is food is food. Some food is, I would consider, not really food, like ultra processed food. It's food like substance. But there's no inherently really good food. There's no inherently like really bad food. There's real food and there's fake food. I don't think there's a catch-all superfood. I think most food has its pros and cons. Like I said before, I think not everyone is going to benefit from the exact same diet. I think most people would benefit from, we could give them like 80 to 90% of what their diet would look like. And I think that would work for most people. But for some people, they're going to have to tweak certain things. Some people tolerate certain foods more than others. I also think people want the same foods to work for them every single day. And this is where I have a little bit of an issue with counting calories or counting macros. Like your needs are going to change day to day. And when we track things so hard that getting outside of that becomes uncomfortable, that's really scary for some people, even though I do recognize that some people do need black and white rules or else they go off the rails. But having more intuitive eating and learning which foods feel good. I also don't love the idea of a cheat meal, like you're cheating on yourself or on something else. Like, again, food is food is food. And we often the hard thing about that is we want to beat ourselves up over it. I don't think food is something worth getting mad about. I can see how that would happen. And I recognize that some people eat something, and like you said, it feels really good in the moment, but the aftermath, whether it's physical or psychological, can really beat us up. And yeah, those are some of my main ones. My two main, like, those are the fallacies. Yeah, those are the main fallacies I have off the top of my head.
Yeah, those are all great. I love it. Your first thing there, I always say it's not good or bad. I always say, how beneficial can it be? Because the only thing I ever say that you could challenge as not being real food and could hurt you is alcohol. Because,
Yeah.
Alcohol is a toxin, right? But, someone who really just needs calories, or, there's literally a place for someone to have carbs in a sugary drink if they haven't had anything, or even like bodybuilders would use it to carb up. Like, there's a place for it in some capacity to give you energy. That's what it's doing, but that's it. And so with some possible detriments, and that's what you got to be aware. I always use a food grading system relative to the individual's opinion. So I give it up to them, and I kind of go A, B, C, D, and F would be, just obviously the alcohol. And then that way, sometimes, and it's towards your goal, right? Because my goal isn't your goal, and it's all kind of different, right? So you give context to it. And I really like that you don't call it a cheat. It's like, I don't like the word cheat, because, that's where the guilt starts. That's where we start going towards guilt. Like, there's a right or wrong. And it's like, no, like, it's get away from guilt, get away from this. Too much emotion around food is a really dangerous thing, right?
And it's hard though, because we forget that our gut has the most innervations outside of our brain. So what you eat truly, truly does affect you psychologically. Most of us have experienced, you feel like really awful. And so you eat all the junk food and you just actually feel worse. Like, you end up in this nasty spiral, and we see how it affects our hormones. And so it doesn't surprise me at all when people have these psychological reactions to different foods that they eat.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, for sure. I'm going to come back to that word gut because I love it. But there was a question I have for you, and this is something I'm quite curious, because I will say that I'm an advocate for being calorie aware, and this is my style, and you have a more unique style. So that's why I'm really curious to know. Like, I believe in, okay, make sure you at least have an idea of where you could be. And because, like, I think our skill of really feeling out the calories is really challenging unless you're eating super paleo and you just know it works for you. Mm-hmm. How do you get someone without counting calories and in a way to get them to get what they're going for? Now, you might be going to more just health rather than body composition, but usually body composition will also improve health. So, what's your strategy, basically?
Yeah, that's a good question, because most of my clients, I'm not necessarily, the main focus isn't body composition. And there is an argument to be made for a calorie deficit, but I think that has to be like that line has to be tiptoed on, because that can create, I just know way too many people with a background in anorexia who have just been calorie deprived for so long that it messes up the metabolism for the rest of their lives. So that's a tricky line to follow. So if body weight isn't in the picture, which for most of my clients, I push that as low down the totem pole as I can, because body weight is really just the amount of gravity on your body. It doesn't actually have, other than that, it doesn't have a huge indicator as to how healthy or unhealthy you are. That being said, there are people who are massively obese or overweight who do need help with that. But even for those people, I wouldn't actually count calories. I would focus on protein intake and sugar intake. That's not to say that I don't have people keep track of their food. And actually, this is also true. I don't have people keep track of the amount of food. I have them keep track of the types of food they're eating, so we can see what they respond to. And for the most part, because my clients, again, aren't typically trying to change their body composition, they're either trying to improve a health marker. I think once we focus on food quality and sometimes food timing and satiation factors, calories aren't a thing. If your body needs calories, you're going to be hungry. And if it doesn't, you're usually not, especially if you're eating the right things.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. And, I definitely see it as a route, because for the most part, like you say, the hardest thing for me to do for an individual is tell them how many calories they should have.
Oh gosh,
because I'm gonna feel like I honestly, I have a decent system, and I go based on their lean body mass that we predict. And if we make the lean body mass, if we assume that their lean body mass is 30% of their total calories, then I know, because it's basically, let's say, someone is 100 and their lean body mass is like 100 grams or 100 pounds, then they would want at least 100 grams of protein, and then that works out to be about 1,200 calories. Now, when I check that with what a lot of these calorie trackers that I kind of bounce around with, and I always tell people, like, add more if it's not enough, but sure. I say guide with this, because at least we know your lean mass, like the operating system, right? That's where we reference it. And it's really cool that I came up with this a little bit, and it matches all these calorie trackers that have their own calculations. So there's just a bit of a...
Do you change it based on their workouts at all?
Well, so I will say that I change it based on their goals.
Okay.
So if an individual's goal is like, I change it based on like their prediction. So I will make that a lower percentage if they're in a maintenance, right? I will make that, I'll tell them you're probably going to need even more than that some days if you have 2 workouts, if they're an athlete. A lot of my clients are trying to, and then from there we also find it. That's the other thing I'll say is, like, let's even find a maintenance. Before we get to this point, we got to make sure the 1,500 calories did nothing to you, meaning you don't change any lean mass and you don't change any fat mass for a month. Like, we start with adding the right stuff in, find your maintenance, and we know this because the body composition didn't really change much and we had you doing a lot of activity. Then that's a pretty fair assessment that, well, if we reduce it, 20% or something like that, that's probably going to do something for you. And again, and that's why I love to hear this style, because I even tell people you don't have to do it. It's just try to make sure you're having a better intuition on whether or not you're eating too much or not enough if you want to improve that body composition, right? Body composition is a hard thing, right? Because that's where you see you're tiptoeing this line of the healthy mindset towards what you're trying to do. You're trying to restrict and then not hate yourself because you're I always go towards the idea of this balance of self-love and self-loathing, and where we bounce around that spectrum so much, right? You got to look in the mirror and say, I want to improve this, but I still love it, right?
Absolutely. That's huge.
That's so hard, right? And I think you can, but you have to, like, I even just started saying to myself, and especially given that I'm going towards bodybuilding, it was important for me to say this. I don't get to say I hate it. I just don't get to say that word, even in my head. And if I can look in the mirror every day and say, I actually really love that, and I know I got to change to what I'm going towards. Like, just don't let yourself go to the other polar opposite, and it makes a big difference.
And it's funny you say that, because the newer research coming out says you don't have to like something, but saying that you like it will actually change the mindset. So often we think we have to like it first, and I mean, in the way you look. So we think we're going to do all this stuff and then we're going to like the way we look. But how many times have you looked at an old picture of yourself and you were like, wow, I looked really good there, or I looked better than I thought I did? But if you would have asked yourself in the moment, you were like, oh no, I feel awful. Like, our hindsight is so different. So until you get happy with what you look like now, change is a lot harder. And you can fake that and it eventually comes, which is awesome.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, so I literally just wrote something up on this the other day, and it's the idea of building your confidence. And I always say it's like, lay your bricks down. So if you're building a wall of confidence, every brick is something you've accomplished in the past, and look to yourself for where the bricks already lie. And if you just sit there and you're looking at what the wall is missing, then you don't fucking know where to place your next brick.
Yeah.
And so it's like, this is what you have. Own it and be proud of it and work off of it. Like that psychological framework is, I'm working from something, I'm never working from nothing. And I think, when people are making change, one of the things that a lot of people miss is like that they're capable of it, that they're capable of spending the time doing it over time, and that change is going to happen, that they're capable of putting in the time and valuing it. Like, value is such a really powerful word. And I really summarize it to this: it's worth your life's time. Like, that is your value. You value work, you value your family. Do you value your own time for yourself, like nutrition and food? Do you have a value for that? Because if you did, you do it, right? Like, you and I will go to the gym. You and I will make sure we cook good food. We have a value because we know it's worth our time on this earth, right?
Well, and we also consider ourselves like, I am healthy, I eat well. Where a lot of people are like, no, I'm going to eat well. Where when you change that into, no, I do eat well, the chance of you actually eating well are a lot better. Or I do exercise, not I'm going to be, it's not I'm going to be fit. It's like, no, I exercise, because those are the things that you're doing right now. So we think we're going to have this big miraculous change all of a sudden, but we forget that the process and the progress along the way is the important part. And that's what gets us to where we want to go. And we also think there's an end, and there's not really an end when it comes to this. It's finding that way on the journey that works best.
Yeah, and it's just so the listeners knows, that's King in the background. He's a funny little pup. He always tries to get attention when he can. But anyway, so I love that you brought that up, because that's identity, and it was a really powerful lesson I got from this book from James Clear. He talks about habits, and what he had said was, like, when you work from the identity out, it's when results happen. You don't think of the results and then think of the process and then think it's going to be, like, people don't even realize the identity is the most important thing. So if you can create your identity, like you had just said, for you and I, like, we are people who exercise. We are people who believe in food. Like, it's who we are as an entity. And so when you can create that narrative, and then, like you say, it, like, talking to people about the end game is living this. The end game isn't getting somewhere and stopping. Ryan Savage had a beautiful quote for me one day, and he said, the process is the result. And he was talking about boxing and boxing athletes, but it also holds true to everything. Whatever you want for a result should be about the lifestyle that takes you there, if you expect to maintain it in any way.
Well, and that's why if you hate what you're doing, it's not going to work. So finding something that you can enjoy, and not that sometimes part of the process isn't fun, or the beginning when you're getting used to it isn't fun, or you're just trying to figure it out. Like, there's a huge learning curve. That's for anything. If we think of even our job, like, when you got a new job, chances are you didn't love it right off the hop, because you probably weren't very good at it. But as we learn those things, like, they get better, they get easier, but also you got to learn to enjoy it, or you're not going to be, it's not worth it, and it's not sustainable.
Fully agree. No, that's the really probably one of the hardest lessons about the whole process. Now, I want to come back to the gut, all right, because this is a bit of a hot topic these days. So for those who don't know, let's go into this a little bit. What do people mean by the gut, and what is leaky gut? What is all this stuff about gut microbiome?
Yeah, so your gut is often thought of as your second brain, and there's a few reasons for that. Part of it is because it does have, like I said before, the most innervations outside of your brain. It's directly connected to your brain. Through those innervations, there's a lot of hormones and neurotransmitters that are made in our gut. And it's also where everything that we eat goes through our gut. So it takes all the information we get through our food and kind of passes it on to the rest of our body. And the crazy thing about our gut is it's only one cell, like the cell lining is only one cell thick. So we can easily damage that, which many of us do through the foods we eat, because what is it, like 60 to 70% of the calories we eat in North America today are ultra processed foods. So not even real food. So it's really easy to damage that gut. I always picture it like that. So if you picture a grain or sugar or some kind of like crappy food scratching at the gut lining and opening that up. Obviously that's not exactly what it does, but that's my analogy or my visual that I like to use. So then what ends up happening is the things that we eat that our body doesn't tolerate very well can get through that gut lining and get into our bloodstream. And this is where we often see things, especially if we see any skin issues, rashes, acne, eczema. It's often things going through our gut lining. And because you're not expelling it by pooping, you're expelling it through your skin, because your skin is a huge organ also. But it also can, like I said before, affect your mood, affect for females, their cycle, their menstrual cycle, for guys, testosterone. There's like lots of things that if our gut's not functioning well, our body just doesn't function well. So when we focus on fixing the gut, and we do that through diet, because that's the main thing that goes, that's the only thing that food goes through, then everything else functions a little bit better too. So for me, I use the gut as like a huge indicator on how someone's functioning.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. People don't realize that, like, and when you're talking about gut, it's like everything from your esophagus, stomach, down your intestinal tract, out your colon, and people don't realize it's not in you till it's in you, right? That's actually all through your body, and like these ultra processed foods. People are just, we grew up with this idea, and we still have the food guide telling us to have a lot of grains and to have a lot of these products that could be doing damage. So you had kind of talked about the skin issues. How else would someone know if grains is bad for them? Is it bad for everyone? Is it bad for some people? And is there some capacity that you can enjoy it?
That's a good question. So I'd say overall, most of the grains we use or eat are processed enough that everyone would benefit from not eating processed grains, like the general things that we see in the grocery store. That being said, there are some less processed grains that I think people would tolerate a little bit more. And those are grains in their whole form. So things like rice, quinoa, for instance, is considered a pseudo grain. It's more like a seed. And a lot of them, if you're going to eat a grain, and think of the way we eat oatmeal. So we soak it, we cook it, and then it's edible. But when it comes to like whole wheat flour or cereals, like you don't do anything to those, and they've been highly processed and just aren't in their real whole form anymore. They've been stripped of all their nutrients. So I think overall everyone would benefit from eating less grains. I don't think they're like the most evil thing. I think it has more to do with the way they're grown and processed. And I'm not opposed to people utilizing whole grains when they actually are whole. Like the thing that bothers me the most is if you look on the website for, I think it's like it's not the Whole Grain Society, but it's the Whole Grain Association of the US or something. And it talks about what a whole grain is. And that's like when you see the whole whole grain, like rice, like quinoa, like you see the whole thing, right? And then they talk about how cereal and bread that you buy at the grocery store are whole grain. They're like, no, it's like the opposite of what you're explaining. It's just, and it's also, I know originally the base of the food guide pyramid, I think it should be used a lot more sparingly than that. For example, I always joke that in the original food guide, it said that you should eat 9 to 11 servings of grain a day. I was like, I think I eat that a year. And I seem to be doing pretty okay.
Oh man, I can't tell you how hard that is to look at. I was looking at it the other day with a guy I was tutoring, and I'm just like baffled at this information. And you know, to be fair, like I understand why it developed this way to some degree,
For sure.
but you know, it's not working.
Yes.
You know, the guidance isn't working, and this is a really good kind of thing to go into. You know, paleo's coming out, and I'm going to ask you to define that. But why do you think, you know, there's, and I fell into this, the more from university and stuff you're taught, the research and all that stuff, and the research points towards more carbs and low fat and stay away from saturated fat. And the paleo community is much more whole food source, which, you know, even makes sense. But, you know, why is it that, you know, our research isn't supporting this yet? And why is it so, you know, baffling these dietitians, this idea of paleo?
Well, there's no money in it. Like no one's making money from, we haven't done a good job yet of making regenerative agriculture like the main source of farming. We're doing these big monocrops and monocultures, and most of our farming is run by like less than 10 farmers in the US. They're these big conglomerates, and they fund a lot of the research. And unfortunately, like if it says something that they don't want it to say, guess what? It's not actually going to be published or be publicized. There's a lot of money in being able to control those things. And until we actually change the farming system, I don't actually see these things changing. And because real whole foods, like no one's getting rich from growing broccoli, no one's getting rich from raising. Actually, that's not entirely true. If you look at these regenerative farms, they are successful. It's just that you can't make them huge. You can mimic them, but you can't scale them. So there are some really cool, like the Savory Institute. If you look at what is it, White Acre Farm,
White Oak Pastures.
White Oak Pastures, yeah. Down in Georgia, they came out with the life cycle of the cow, and they found that instead of releasing greenhouse gases, like we always joke about cow farts, it's actually their burps. But anyways, they actually take CO2 out of the atmosphere and put it back into the soil. It's the only thing that might actually reverse greenhouse gases, which is also why it blows my mind that more people aren't talking about it when it comes to environmental issues, because we don't have anything else that works that efficiently. And I have said this before, and I will say it 1,000 times again, but I don't think we can beat nature. I think we have to learn how to work with it. And I think that's one of the reasons that the paleo movement is so big, because it looks at human development and brings us closer to how we got here. And humans didn't get here from eating highly processed wheat. We sort of did, because agriculture allowed us to grow communities. So I see the need for it. But we certainly didn't get here from monocrops, from only having one type of food grow for acres and acres and acres. We had diversity in our food and our systems, our environmental systems. So the cool thing about paleo right now is paleo was traditionally like the Paleolithic diet. So it was meat, veg, nuts and seeds. It avoided beans, legumes, grains, dairy. But we're seeing it kind of transition into this real whole food, like more like find the real whole foods that work for you and go with it, versus being like very dogmatic. Like, no, you absolutely can't eat beans, or no, you absolutely can't eat dairy. Mark Sisson when he first talked about it, he actually called it primal because it included dairy. And when we have, like, some people tolerate like unpasteurized dairy. And if you look at the Weston A. Price Foundation, which his background is, he was a dentist who went out to Africa and thought he was going to do all these dental work for these tribes, and realized when he went out there, all of them had perfect teeth. And he couldn't understand why these people had perfect teeth when they didn't have access to dentistry. And turns out when you eat good food and you're raised on good food, you actually don't need dental care. So he was like, oh, I guess when we eat good food, we're better off. So.
Yeah, it's amazing what happens when you take all those processed foods, and especially we know the carbs and the sugars out of the food, out of the mouth. It just makes such a huge difference.
A huge difference.
And I this is where I'm going to turn to, because it's kind of a good note. When I went on carnivore, I actually noticed such a difference in my gums. Like, I bear in mind, I also had to floss more because I get, meat stuck in it, but it was really interesting. Inflammation went down. My gums felt better. I got less complaints from my dentist, and I was just really amazed. So why don't you describe to me, or, the listeners, a little bit your view on carnivore? You think it's crazy, or what is benefits or limitations?
I actually am so glad I was introduced to carnivore. So in my background, when you did a detox, you did usually a plant protein based powder and vegetables, and that's it. That's all. So you're starving. If you have like intolerances, good luck. I remember I always felt good when I did those detoxes, but I would end up constipated, which is crazy because you'd think you'd be eating enough fiber. But the results on carnivore, especially for autoimmune, and we don't have, like, as a society, we don't have a good answer for autoimmune diseases. And autoimmune diseases, last I checked, are number 3 in the most common chronic illnesses in the US right now. And they're not going away anytime soon. So I actually really like carnivore as a elimination diet. Most people aren't sensitive to certain meats. Some, yes, like I get some people have egg sensitivities. But in general, I actually, after understanding the plant paradox and the different reactions to vegetables, and the autoimmune paleo protocol actually has to cut out a bunch of different vegetables that are issues for a lot of people. But I actually love seeing carnivore used as an elimination diet and as a reset diet. And I also love it because I think people under eat protein, and it's a really easy way to increase protein and people to realize how satiating it is. So as much as I don't think carnivore is a long-term solution for a lot of people, I think it's a really great temporary launching pad for making big sweeping changes to your diet and to your health. I've even known people with fertility issues who did carnivore, and it completely changed everything. But it's because it's fixing your hormones. You're not having those blood sugar surges, and we forget how much blood sugar surges are associated with polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is the number 1 cause of infertility in women in the US right now. And probably Canada. Canada is very similar to the US. There's just more data that comes out of the US. But that being said, I know too many people on carnivore who end up with digestive issues or become super, super sensitive to adding different foods back in. And I'm more of the camp of, let's see how much diversity we can do in your diet while you still feel good. There's Rob Wolf, who is kind of like one of the original guys who did research in the paleo nutrition stuff. And he took a bunch of soldiers I think he was working out of Reno at the time, put them on strict paleo diet. They were all super healthy. But then they got sent to Afghanistan. And as soon as they started eating off, they were all sick for about 2 weeks. So when you're that strict, you don't necessarily have the resilience that I think we need to live in general society. So there's something to be said for improving diversity. That's not the same for everyone. Like if you're celiac, you really cannot eat gluten, like at all. That being said, I've heard of people who are celiac who have been able to eat gluten if it is fermented, which deactivates a lot of the proteins that you're allergic to. But for carnivore, I like the idea of it temporarily. I'm not on board yet with long-term forever of it.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I did it for a while, and the big thing too is you just kind of hit on what I experienced, digestive issues. But it's like if you don't, we didn't really touch on it a little bit, but with the gut, it's like intestinal bacteria will populates in your intestinal tract, and if you don't get used to these foods again, it's going to feel really weird when you eat some other things, and your body's going to react poorly. So I fully agree. And, it's also, it goes into that extreme realm. Now, I was glad I experienced it in, like you say, term period. I would, even if, say, someone wants to try it for a month, yeah. But I would really edge them to be like, don't think about doing this for the rest of your life unless you're going to do this the rest of your life, knowing that you're going to deal with limitations, right? So you had touched on something really good there, plant paradox. I know Gundry, he's got this pretty interesting concept of lectins and phytates and oxalates. What can you tell us about those?
So plants are really interesting, and we, as humans, we think of organisms that are similar to us to being organisms, or being important, or having survival skills or survival mechanisms, which is, I get the vegetarian and vegan movement. I get it. I get that it can be sad to kill and slaughter an animal for your own benefit, but life gives life, and we forget that plants have mechanisms in them too to protect them from predators, because organisms want to only do two things in life. And one thing is to survive, and the other thing is to reproduce. That's it. That's all. Like, that's what all of us are on this earth for, to try to survive and try to reproduce, as long as there's not overpopulation. But plants have these mechanisms that if they're not, so my example that I like to use is like a wheat. So wheat, it grows, for it to survive, it needs to like blow in the wind, land somewhere else, and then grow. Once it hits our mouth, its life is over. Like, you're not going to poop out wheat and it's going to grow. So it actually has these mechanisms on them, these lectins, these phytates, that wreak havoc on their environment. Humans have learned how to get over this a bit, and that's by soaking them, sprouting them, fermenting them, cooking them. That deactivates a lot of it, but it doesn't necessarily deactivate all of it. And some of us are more sensitive to it than others. This is why we don't eat raw beans. This is why we don't eat raw wheat berries. They're all processed. They're all of these things are deactivated so we can eat them. But some people react to them more than others. And the other funny thing is, when people are so married to their diet, or the morals of their diet, I should say, when things in their diet aren't doing good things for them, they want to turn a blind eye to it. We become, we don't want to recognize certain things. So I think when we get information like this, that totally begets the morality of why we choose to eat or not eat something. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Like, people are more than welcome to eat based off of cultural norms or what they think is best for their environment. But I think we often forget that also your body wants to survive, and we need to, or I would encourage us to do the things that are best for your body in the moment.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, there's, not to go too far into the morals and the ethics, but it's really hard to live a moral life these days. I found out if you go to buy flowers for someone, children might have been the ones that were picking them. So it's like, it is a funny TV show that talks about this, where an act that might seem like an inherently innocent act is no longer innocent, because you're actually tied to the the inhumane acts that humans are doing in order to provide it for you, like your iPhone. Like it's
I
it's
know.
it's so challenging to live a moral life now, and people are unaware of how it's all around us. But
There's something to be said for being naive, right?
yeah, oh yeah, ignorance is bliss for sure.
Yeah.
But and I found it really interesting when I got to hear that a handful of cashews, if they're not roasted and cooked, would kill you. You know, and it's really funny too, because you look at the inside of a seed of an apple, is there's arsenic right in the seed, and this is where sometimes I was pretty hesitant on it, because I was kind of taught to by my education to believe in the research, and then realize the research it's just not there, because they're not looking for it. But you look at this symbiotic relationship we have with some plants, like an apple, right? It's red, it's bright. It's like, that caught my attention. You eat it, the core gets a little tough. Well, I don't want to eat that part. And then you move that seed for that plant. Like, that makes inherently sense, right? And then you got these other things that probably just didn't intend to get eaten, and we know that there's so many plants that can kill people.
Oh,
And
the majority of them, like most of the plants on Earth, are not edible. Yeah, it's wild.
And so, like, it's not a foreign concept for it to be a protective agent. How effective it is to us, like, a lot of them, I think, were likely, and this is all theoretical when you talk about evolutionary stance, is that they were probably on a very micro level to deal with insects, and then humans came along, and then they had to alter more and more. So, you had kind of said it too. It's a dose that makes a poison on a lot of these things. And if we continue to eat things, you continue to have these issues. Like, oxalates are a really interesting one to me, because when you start going down this rabbit hole of oxalates, which is in spinach and kale and almonds and Swiss chard, it's like, well, I thought these were healthy things. I was having my spinach shake every day, and then it turns out that if you have this for years, you can develop these oxalic acid crystals in your body and joints. It'll feel like you have arthritis, and then you can't even just inherently stop, because that even causes issues. Have you dealt with one with oxalic acid issues?
I not often. My mom has had issues with it in the past, but she has undiagnosed autoimmune stuff too. So she kind of has dealt with a lot of these different things. And I don't know if you have clients who do this, but I love when I have a patient who's like, yeah, but I used to be able to eat that without any issues. I'm like, yeah, but you also ate it year after year after year. And now your body's finally telling you, hey, give it a break. Like, we're need to back off on this for a little bit. Like, as I said before, like, humans are very resilient, and we can put up with a lot of garbage for a long period of time, but eventually it will kick us in the butt. So it's worth recognizing, or at least being aware of.
Absolutely. I love that you brought up the plant paradox, because I recently just heard a podcast with Gundry and Paul Saladino, and they talked about his new book, which I really want to read, and it's the energy paradox. And what he was talking about on it is how some people can have the calorie output in their body as high as someone that's in a tribe who's just a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And they basically determine that the immune system of the person that's a sedentary worker, that's eating and inflamed, and just like their immune system just working overload, is burning as many calories as someone who's actually doing work. And that's
interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, I got to read the book before I really say all of this stuff, but that was the fundamental principle they were talking about. So, you just gotta realize, just because you can deal with it doesn't mean go back to optimal. Like, sometimes you got to ask yourself, what's going to be better for you. And this is where I kind of like, I draw my line. I show them where I have my idea. And for the person who doesn't want to give up bread, it's like, unless you're actually inflamed and all these things, I can't tell you that it's going to kill you, right? There's probably going to be other things that's going to kill you. But I'm going to tell you probably feel better if you got away from this thing and you get used to eating other things. Like, I was literally just talking to my sister the other day when I told her how to eat and encourage more meat, and it was like, she was like, oh, I don't really like this stuff. And then, well, you look at your diet, and it was mainly eating a lot of processed carbs. Talked to her the other day. yeah, I really love it. I don't even crave anything anymore. It's like,
Oh,
yeah.
for sure. And I've had lots of people like that. And remember how we were saying if you're on carnivore and then you go back to vegetables, you might feel like garbage for a little while. It works the other way around too. You have people who have been vegetarian or vegan for years and they have to ease back into meat because they feel so awful for a little bit. And that change to your gut microbiome, or even just the mental hurdle of it, you've drilled into your head for so long, like this is the right way, this is the right way. And now you're challenged and now you're changing something. Like we said at the very beginning, if you don't have a reason to change, you're not going to make a change. And many of these people, because of their diet and maybe something that they've been doing for a long time and didn't realize that was injuring them, they have to make those change. Leah Keith, the author of Vegetarian Myth, is like just mind blowing. Because she had some very serious health issues from lack of animal protein for so long that she has like permanent damage to her spine. We see degeneration really fast if you're missing those key nutrients. And we're seeing now, from an amino acid standpoint, all amino acids are essential. Like we used to think we could make some and it was okay, but there's new research in the prenatal world that like every amino acid is essential. Like we need animal proteins to survive as a human race. And that's how we got here to where we are now. And that is the difference. Can we survive without it? Absolutely. And some people will survive better than others, but will we thrive? Like that's where the question is, especially when we talk about reproduction and the next generation. And I think it's fair to say that the next generation is not healthier than we are right now. So there's something we need to be doing that's different. And I'm actually really excited to see, I probably won't see this in my lifetime, but I'm excited to see there are so many people right now who understand as much as we can about food and nutrition and the lifestyle and the impact it has. I'm excited to see, I guess, the future generations and what that looks like, because I shouldn't say excited because it's kind of a fear, because I think something's going to happen that like wipes out half the population someday. And I think that's going to be a huge part of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, very similar. I'm excited for the next 10, maybe 20 years. And then somewhere's around there, our food system's going to collapse, or like you say, it could be another, a more extreme version of COVID that actually kills the healthy people too. And, to me, what I'm excited for is when they finally start actually challenging this, the paleo, the whole food eating, even the carnivore research, and actually put it to paper and say, hey, we studied these carnivores and they were unhealthy, or they were probably not as unhealthy as people think. Like, let's get rid of some of these myths. Let's actually show, like, what boggles my mind is that there is some research there. It's sitting there and it's being ignored. And it's for protein intake alone. If you were to take the protein intake that you recommend to athletes, like it's there, and it's double what they tell the whole population to have, but they're going to tell the population to train. They're going to tell the population to do some aerobic. Why do we not care about their lean muscle tissue whatsoever when this nutrient is the most satiating? And so, I mean, you could get into the whole conspiracy of who's supporting what and everything, but I do generally believe that for the most part, dietitians and those who are responsible for it have some consideration of like the facts, and it's like they don't look at that research. So I'm hoping in about 10 years from now, we can start, like, to me, the spectrum of eating is opening up, because
for sure.
Because like it used to be, in just my view, for sure, is like it was, controlling like I did the traditional bodybuilding. That was the one way to lose weight. And then, you look at the Kansas Healthy Food Guide, which is, what it is. But I'll even I don't support it as much for optimal, but the spectrum from all the way to eating nothing but plants to eating nothing but meat. And I think the cool thing is you can have people living quite well on either end. And the more that we kind of going down that path, and this is the really interesting thing to me, is like, as long as we're not in this processed food, most of those people are actually going to live pretty good. And again, for the most part, you actually generally hear about the vegans and vegetarians hopefully finding, hey, some of these plants aren't as good for me. And I think some of this is going to get cleaned up in the next 10 years or so. It'll be a constant debate, don't get me wrong, but
as it should be, because it's going to be different from depending on who it is. And that's the things we forget about nutrition is nutrition science is in its infancy. Like, it is a very new thing. And we also forget that humans are very different. Like, and nutrition is really, really hard. And arguably it would be, unethical to control someone's diet to that extreme, depending on the situation. So it's just and we already know that people who record their what they ate is like very inaccurate. So a lot of these nutritional studies are just like so hard to even control in a lab, or to even control. So unless they're in the lab and you're literally controlling everything that goes into them and everything that they're doing, it's really hard. So a lot of it's going to be anecdotal, and a lot of it's going to be trial and error. And like we said, when it comes to real whole foods, there's just not a lot of money to be made in that. So who's looking into that? Like, even the governments aren't going to make much money. And there's too much money to be had in people being sick. So unless we all do our own due diligence, it's people like you and me, and there's plenty of people like us who are talking about this too, thankfully.
yeah. And it's just like, I love how you said that, because it's so true that people tend to forget that it's in its infancy. And one thing I always tell someone is, I'll usually cover it by saying, this is my opinion and this is what I think. This is what I know so far. You talked to me 12 months ago, I would have said the carnivore was ridiculous. That's my favorite diet. And so it's like, I loved Gundry's statement, because even I don't agree with everything he says, but he said something beautiful. And he said, after someone questioned him about how he changed his opinion on something, like, how could you change your opinion? He's like, because I learned something, because I found something out new. And you ask me 5-10 years from now, I hope to do the same. And I thought that was so beautiful and eloquent, that he could say, I'm okay with being wrong, and we're going to find shit out as we go along. Anyone in this industry that tries to say we really know or we have a good idea is just going to be wrong, because right there, it's just not even giving science its true test of time.
Yeah, run in the other direction. And if we know anything about science, the goal of science is to prove whatever you're doing wrong. Like, the goal is to prove it wrong. Like, you're finding everything you can to prove it wrong. And once you find all those things, and there's not that many things to prove it wrong, then you know it's right. But we're stuck in the cycle of everyone has to be right. And then if you change your mind, you're like, you're just shunned by your whole community, because they're following you because you said this one thing and they're holding on to it so tight. So if there's someone out there that hasn't changed their mind on something in the last year or two, then either A, they're not learning and growing, or they're already wrong.
Yeah, they're stuck, right? So here's a good question. I've heard this posed before, and as I just told you, mine was carnivore, and it opened my mind to so many other things. What's something that's shifted your paradigm in the last few years? What's something that's been like, I think I was wrong?
The most recent thing, and I don't know. There's two things actually. The one you actually kind of mentioned is that on the spectrum of like vegan to carnivore, real whole foods, no matter which way you put it, will probably beat a diet with lots of processed foods. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And that's not something I maybe would have admitted to like a year or two ago. The other thing that I recently changed my opinion on, and I would say this is only in the last like few months, are protein powders. I was so in the camp that like, no processed foods, protein powder is a processed food, like get your food from real whole foods. And then when I finally really understood the power of getting enough protein and how hard it is to get enough protein for a lot of people, I realized there is very much a time and place for a protein powder for many people. I would have said before that it mostly for like kids who you can get enough food down their throat, or someone who really didn't want to take the time to make food, then it might be okay. But I've definitely changed my tune on protein powder. And especially for older women, I think older women are very much not getting enough protein, and it's an easy way to get it into their system. And there are some like good quality protein powders out there now, which is nice.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I'm similar to yourself, but it's funny. I always loved them, but I actually came to more to the realization of how when they're not useful, and just in terms of you're trying to use it to up the protein, and that's how I actually use it now. I kind of like the flavor and stuff like that too, but I will always make sure people know it's like I appreciated that if I ate a chicken breast, I'm going to feel better. But if you have the protein shake, you're going to get it down, and you might enjoy the flavor a bit better. Know that you're not going to get that satiety. Like I think the carnivore diet taught me so much about satiety and like what is fullness, like how fullness is an important tool for using your intuition that's been so messed up. And because it's a processed food, it's not going to have the satiety cues,
Well, and you're drinking it. We forget that when you drink your food, it doesn't trigger the things in your brain the same as literally chewing them and swallowing them and digesting them. So people ask me about smoothies all the time. And this is where I was like, very much like, don't drink your food, things like that. And I would always say, like a little bit tongue in cheek, are you trying to put on weight? Because that's the only reason I would say you should be drinking your calories, because it's way too easy to overeat food. And when you take all that stuff and put it in a bowl, like you would never eat that much stuff, but because you blended it all up, now it's easier to get down. It's a great way to get extra calories in. But yeah.
No, I fully agree. The only time I really encourage it for the most part is efficiency, like on the go, they're busy. And or if they want it as like an appetite suppressant at the end of the day after all the other calories, and have a chocolate shake instead of the traditional one. And one thing I did, it was a really interesting thing where I had the same problem with smoothies where I'd just crush them. And so what I would do is I would have frozen berries and I would put them into my shake and let them thaw out. And then I physically make sure I eat them with a spoon, because
good for
the
you.
mechanical eating of that food slows it down just a little bit, right? Like, like go back to just what you had said. You chew protein, you never drink it, right? It's
Right.
like the only thing you really should be drinking is water and your electrolytes. So, but that's a conversation for another day. Let's dive into one. I got two more questions. I think you know these. So, what does your food look like? And what is your current ambition?
So my food right now, I typically eat 2 big meals a day and then maybe one smaller snack. The weirdest thing about my diet compared to most people, if you don't understand intermittent fasting, and I don't intentionally intermittent fast, but I don't eat my first meal typically till like sometime between 11 and 1. It's just how my day works out. It's just how my hunger cues work out. So that's when my first meal is, and it's big. I would say over 90% of my diet is meat and veg, and that is about it. And I eat typically big meals. Like I would say my main meal is like, bigger than people would expect, I guess. So like lots of meat, lots of veg. I always cook it. I don't like raw foods very often. That's my main diet. I drink coffee. I very, 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 very rarely eat bread. Maybe a couple times a year, like I said before. And I've just recently been eating a little bit of rice sometimes, but not a ton. And actually recently I've been eating a bit more like traditionally prepared beans, like refried beans or hummus. But for the most part, that's my diet. And that's been my diet for like the better part of the last 10 years, I would say.
That sounds good stuff. And it's funny because, again, if you talked to me a year ago or 2 years for sure, but definitely last year, I was like, that's so hard to, in that now I'm doing it. Like, that's my diet. Like, it's, I think the coolest thing with the carnivore was realizing how many different proteins and meats I could enjoy and how enjoyable they were. And once you get used to that routine and having that, it's not for everyone. I will say that. Like, I get energy from it. It works for me. It works my appetite and all that stuff. But that was a cool experience. So the last question here is a Strong Ambition podcast. What is your most current ambition?
Lately, what I have been doing, and this is partially because of COVID, so we can't really do in-person courses, is I took most of my courses and made them into online courses so people can get them at any point in time. And that's been, as much as I hate being on video, I actually really enjoy the editing process and seeing people take them and their feedback. And mine are on Skillshare. So Skillshare is typically for like creatives. It's a lot of art type of things, but there's also a lot of business and entrepreneur and marketing stuff. And then there's a little bit of baking courses and cooking courses, which is a lot of fun. So people do a project. So they make one of the recipes and then share it with everyone, which is a lot of fun to see.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so you've been doing that since kind of COVID started, and you're quite a few on there?
Yeah, I have, how many do I have on there now? 6-ish, 6 or 7. And I have a few more that are just being waited or are being launched in the next near future.
So what do they look for if they're looking for you on Skillshare? What do you name it?
Oh, yeah, you can just look up my name, Kristen Mitteness, and it's I labeled all my nutrition courses under the Well-Fed Kitchen.
I like it. Well-Fed Kitchen. That's good stuff. Well, anywhere else you want people finding you, a website or anything like that?
Everything's on my website. That's drkristenchiro.com. I'm most active on Instagram. So if you're looking for food inspiration, exercises, things like that, some of my travels and all things chiropractic, that's where you'll find them.
That's perfect. Well, thank you so much, Kristin. This was a wonderful conversation. You touched on the intermittent fasting. We're going to dive into that next time I have you on. We got a lot more we can nerd out about. So this is great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining today, guys. Really enjoyed this conversation with Kristin. I hope you took some really good information from that. There's so many different rabbit holes we could have dove down, but I wanted to cover a lot of topics with her because she's very knowledgeable when it comes to nutrition and, all the different problems. I have really gotten into more of the holistic eating myself since really actually her influence and her boyfriend, Quinn, who's one of my best friends, really encouraged me to look into the carnivore diet. And once I dove into that, I opened my ears and I opened my mind to realize there are other ways. And that was something I'll be forever grateful for. And now, it's helps me help more people because I've realized there's more ways to help people. So it's been really cool. And I hope you learned a lot from it. If you have any questions about it, please send me a message, a DM, anything like that. And I'm totally open ears. I'm open to hear what your problems are with food and maybe some of the cleaning up some of the diet might be able to help you. And I'm here to help. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to message me. You can find me on Instagram at rqtrainingnutrition.com. Or you can email me, rylandqually@gmail.com. Just give me a shout out and I'll help you in any way I can because that's what I'm here to do. So thank you very much for joining me today. And remember, it is not about the pursuit of happiness, but rather it's the happiness within the pursuit.